Assalamu alaikum everyone. This is lecture 23 for CX116 Object Oriented Programming. In the last lecture, we started to design a small scale application called Quiz Game, and we completed the design phase. We explored various options and we selected few options and we finalized a class diagram for our application. In today's session, we'll continue to work on the same application, and today I'll show you how we can use that class diagram to code this application. So let's get started. To recall, we selected 4 classes for our application. First one was this question. Then second one was question DB. A question will hold just a simple question. Question DB will hold list of questions or our question bank. And then there was a quiz class which will create a quiz. And then there was a user interface class which will glue all these things together. So what was our objective? That we'll start coding class by class. We'll take up one class at a time, we'll code it, we'll test it individually, and then we'll integrate everything in the end. So user interface will be that class which will be integrating all our work together. So let's start coding our first class called question. Now what we had decided that this class will represent a single question, and what fields can we associate with it? A question will contain the actual question with a question mark at the end, and then 3 options. We fix 3 options for each question and then the correct answer. So here is that class. There is one small change in it. If you notice that the instance attribute that I have listed here, which is question, which is of list type, I mistakenly wrote it with a capital Q in the last lecture. So it's with a small q. So it really doesn't matter, but this is the actual instance variable name that I have used in the code. So this is one instance variable, and this single instance variable will contain all those fields that I just told you. Okay, all the options, the question, and the correct answer, and we'll place them in a list, right? So okay, and then initiator, we had decided that initiator method will initialize an empty list. So here's my class, and here's my initiator function or the constructor, and here's the initialization. Now there could be other ways to initialize the list too, like I have placed none at 2 places. You can leave those places blank as well, but the main point here is that the central element is another list. So I have placed an empty list over there so that I can directly use append method later on to put elements in this sublist. So this is one way. Other way could be blank space, comma, this empty list, comma, blank space. Okay. Now this second method is set question. It will simply be passed a question in the form of a string, and that will be assigned to the first field of our list, right? That question list. So here how it will work. The first one will obviously the first element, it can be referenced using this 0, this index 0, right? So this will set the question. Now let's come to the options. As we are providing 3 options, so I expect user to pass 3 options, and then here that will be the second index or second item in my main list question. So I am referring it with index 1, and I'm simply appending these values one by one to it. Now I'm able to append these values because I have already initialized that list to an empty list. You see the central element in question, that's an empty list. If I hadn't initialized it before, I won't be able to use these append methods to put these options there. Now in this third method, I will set answer field, which is the third index of that question, instance variable question. Now here user will pass n, and we had decided that we'll use a number here. We'll not use the correct answer, which should be a string, but we'll use number of the option instead, and it will help us reduce mistakes made by the user, because if the user is entering the correct answer again after entering three options, he or she can make mistakes, spelling mistakes or some other mistakes. But here, what we'll do, we'll ask user to enter any value from 1 to 3 that refers to the correct answer, and we can put the check also, and I'll show you. Actually, I'm not putting the check here. I'll put the check where the user inputs the value. So here we are just passing n, and I'm assuming that this n is either 1 or 2 or 3. Actually, it is the option number. Option number 1, option number 2, or option number 3. So whatever n is, it will be assigned to the third field of question list here, right? Now, let's come to the next three methods. These are all print methods. So the first method, print method, print question, will print the question with options. The second one, print correct answer, will print the answer only. And the third one will print both, like question with options along with the answer. Now, before seeing implementation of these methods, let's clarify the format, storage format for question. So this is how we are storing our question. In a 2D list, the first element is the question itself, and then we have a sublist containing the three options and then the correct option number. So how am I going to reference this question list later in other methods? See, QS will always be accessed using question and index 0, right? What about the index of op1? It is the first element or first index of question list and the 0th index of that sublist. So actually it's part of a 2D list, so it should be referenced using double indexing. Here it is. 1 refers to the index within question list and 0 refers to the index within this sublist, okay, where we are placing these options. Similarly, op2 will be 1 1 and op3 will be 1 2, and the last one n is at index 2, right? So I hope it's not difficult, but I just gave this information here so that just to clarify any confusions. One more thing that I want you to note here is that this n, it could be 1 2 or 3, like it's storing actually option number, not the index, right? Because you see, within that option list, option 1 is at index 0, option 2 is at index 1, and option 3 is at index 2, but we are not storing index in n, rather we are storing the option number 1 2 or 3. So if I want to access the correct option out of this option list, so what I need to do, I need to access that sublist using first index as 1, because the correct option will be accessed using double index. So first index will be 1, and the second index I can obtain it using n, and it will be n minus 1, because n is the option number and not the index. So in order to convert it to index, I just need to subtract 1. So if I want to access the correct answer using this number n, this is the formula, right? Now, keeping this in mind, let's implement these print methods. Actually, I'm not going to implement all these methods. I'll show you just one, because they are all similar. They are all printing and they are not very complicated. So I'll just show you just one method just to clarify these indexing that we have just seen. So I'm implementing this function, print question with answer. So it will display the complete information about that question. So first I'm printing the question, right? And then I'm printing option A. You see, I have marked it A. That means user will input A, B, or C for answer later. I'll show you how we'll map that to n. But right now I'm displaying A option 1, B option 2, and C option 3, right? And finally, the same method is printing the correct answer also. and that's how we'll print the correct answer. Okay, it's within that question list, but we'll access it using double index. First index is 1 and second index is obtained from n. So basically self dot question 2 is referring to n, and then n minus 1 will give us the place where correct option resides. So I just showed you that the user, we are putting options like in ABC format. So user will input A, B or C as correct answer. So let's see how we can implement this check answer method. Now this method will take the answer. So as per our printing pattern, user will enter A, B or C. So ANS will contain a single character A, B or C. So what I have to do, I have to map this A, B and C to numbers 1, 2 and 3, because n is storing numbers and not ABC. So there could be many ways. The method that I am using here is that I have defined a dictionary and it is called key, and here this dictionary is giving me the number in place of that alphabet. So if user passes A, I'll obtain value of A which is 1. If user passes B, I'll get 2, and if user passes C, I'll get 3. So what I have to do, I have to check the key check the answer passed by the user by comparing it with the answer that is stored in that answer field or in that n field. So self dot question 2 is referring to n, right? And key answer, so if user passes A, key answer will give me 1. If user passes B, it will give me 2, otherwise 3. So basically it will contain a number, and that number will be compared to n, and n is referred to by self dot question 2. So if this happens, I'll simply return true. That means the answer is correct. Otherwise, I return a false. Now, if you go see that code file that I have provided you for this class, there you will find some test code also, commented test code, and I use the test code to test my class. So you can also do that. You can test this class using the test code, or you can write your own test code. The point here is that you instantiate object of this class and call different methods and make sure that they are working properly. Now let's come to the second class, question DB. This is partial class. I'm showing just two methods that I'll be implementing on this slide. What we had decided for this class, let's start defining this class first. That this class will hold the question bank. So question bank, it should be stored in some file, otherwise we'll have to enter that question bank every time we start our application. So let's suppose I have maintained a question bank in a file, and what this constructor will do, it will simply load that question bank whenever we instantiate an object of this type. So I'll call a method inside, instance method inside load question list, and I'll show you the implementation of this method shortly. But first let's implement add question. Now this load question list, it will simply read that file, and it will load all the questions in a list of questions, and each question will be of question type. I'll come to this shortly. Now before implementing the second method add question, let me make you recall that what this class does, it maintains a question bank, it loads question bank from the file, and it also provides some functions so that the user or the manager or the administrator can edit that question bank. He or she can add questions to it, remove questions from it, or simply can view that question bank. So in add question, what we are trying to do, the manager will create a new question, enter a new question, enter its option, enter the correct answer, and then we'll store that in a question type entry, and we'll make that part of our question bank. Now you see that instance variable question list, so that means that is the name of the list which will be created in load question list method, and to that list we'll be loading all those questions from the file. So here's the method add question. Okay, first I am creating an empty question. Like, this is our type, our class question, our own defined type called question, and I'm calling it Q. Then we are prompting the user or the manager, whoever is using this option, to enter a valid question, enter any question. In fact, we cannot check the validity here. So whatever user enters, that comes in X, and we place it in that question field using set question. I hope you remember that this question class contains this method set question. Similarly, I can input option 1 and then input option 2, input option 3, and I can place all these three options, x1, x2, x3. I can pass these to set options list, and it will set it in the options field. Now let's come to the answer. Let's prompt the user to enter answer, and as we have already decided that we'll ask user to enter the number 1, 2, or 3. Now there could be certain problems here. First problem is that, you see, we are typecasting whatever user enters, we are typecasting it to integer. So if user enters something other than integers, this will raise exception. Second, if the user doesn't enter what we are asking him to do, like if he or she enters any number other than 1, 2, or 3. So let's place a check here and use exception handling. So I'm placing it in a try block, and here is my check. So if user enters anything other than number, then the first statement, the typecasting to integer, will automatically raise error. And if X doesn't fall in this range, then we are forcefully raising the same error, because we know it that if it's not an integer, a value error will be raised. So we are raising the same error for this case also, and we are handling it in this except block. Okay, and then we are asking the user to enter a valid option. But if the user enters the correct value, so what we want this to happen. We'll simply set that in the answer field. And now after setting that answer, we have all three fields set: the question field, the options field, and the answer. So we'll just append this queue, this question, to our question bank. I hope you remember that question list represents our question bank. We loaded the question bank in it in the constructor, right? Now, one more thing that I can do here is that if the user does not enter a valid option, I can keep on asking the user until or unless a valid value has been entered. So what I can do, I can put all this in a loop, right? And if I reach this else block, that means user has entered correct value, then I'll break the loop, right? So this is the complete implementation for add question method. Now, before showing you how remove question should be implemented, let me show you another method, print question list, and I'll explain shortly that why I'm doing this. Now in this method, what I'll do, I'll print all the questions. Question list contains the list of questions, so I'll print all the questions. But one thing additional I'll print with each question, I'll assign every question an ID or a serial number, so that if the user later wants to remove any question, he or she can refer to that question using that ID, because that's the easiest way. Otherwise, entering question, comparing question, that would be really difficult. So let's implement this method first, print question list. So here I'm initializing this ID, a local variable, to 1. And you see, question list is my list of questions, so I'm just iterating over this list, and each time question will contain that iterator question will contain one question. So I'll first print the ID, and I know that this question, each question is of question type. And if you recall, in that class, in class question, we defined this method print question with answers. So if the manager wants to see the list, he or she should view the whole thing, the question, the options, and the answer. So I'm simply calling this method from that class question, right? And then I'll simply increment the ID. So you see, this loop will keep on running, and each time it will print one question from that question list, right? So this is pretty easy, but just I wanted to show you that I'm using or printing serial number or ID as well here. Now let's come to the method remove question. Now here, what I assume that the user have viewed the whole list using that print question list. Like he or she knows the ID or the number of the question he or she wants to remove. So I'll ask the user to enter that ID, and the same problem exists here. I need to check if the user enters a valid ID. It should be an integer ID between 1 and what should be the maximum limit. You see, it could be any question from the question list, so the upper limit should be length of that question list. So here I'm putting it in try block. Here's my check, right? And I'll raise value errors the same way as we were doing before in that add question method. Now in accept block, I'm just intimating that the ID entered by the user is invalid. I am not going to ask the user repeatedly to enter again and again, because here it's not necessary. So if the user enters an invalid ID, I'll print this message and I'll just return from here to the main menu or whichever the caller is for this remove question method. Otherwise, I'll come to this statement. I'll come to this statement only if the try block is successfully executed, because if I enter accept block, I'll return from there and I'll never reach this statement. So if I reach this statement, that means user has entered a very valid ID, and I'm simply popping that ID from my list. Now you see, I made this question list of list type. So this is an advantage, that I can call this built-in function, built-in method of list class pop directly here. So user is entering ID, and since my IDs were not starting from 0 and I have to provide the n index, so I'll just subtract 1 from it, right? I hope it's not that difficult to understand. So that's how I implement the remove question method. Now save question list. The purpose of this method is to store my list, question list, into a file. So filing is really simple. I'll simply open a file in write mode. We know that this will create a file if it doesn't already exist. So, and then we had decided that we'll write this list question by question. So I'm running a loop again on my question list, and each time I'll convert my question into str and then I'll simply write it. And I'm also putting that \n so that next question is written on the next line. That's it, and then I closed my file. Now let me show you the organization of my file, like how the questions will be printed. Now here is my file. I hope you can see the name of this file at top left corner here, questiondb.txt. And you might not be expecting all this inside this file. Actually, I have already entered, or I have already created a question bank. These are about 20 or 21 questions. What I want you to note here is that, see, each question's format. This is my question, first question. It's a list, these square brackets. First element of this list is the question, ending with a question mark. And then I have this sublist. It contains three it further contains 3 items, which are the 3 options or to the answer. And then at the end I have the number of the correct answer. So what is the capital of child? Correct answer is Santiago, and that is option number 3. Therefore I have stored 3 here. And you can see in other questions also, what is the chemical formula for table salt? It is NaCl, which is option number 2. So I have stored 2 here. Now what I want you to note here is, see, the format we used, we wrote each question on a separate line. While saving the file, or while implementing that save to file method, we wrote each question on a separate line. If you write the whole list at once, what will happen? The next question will appear right after this here. and that won't be very much readable, because all questions they'll go like this, and that won't be very much readable. So now this format is readable in from this, like you can read all the question from this txt file as well. And another advantage is that you can enter your questions also here directly. Actually, I entered all those questions directly here in this file, because I know the format. I know how I am storing my question: first the question, and then the options, and then the answer. So you can do that too. So you can either use that application to enter a new question, or you can also enter, being the programmer of this application, you can enter the questions directly from here also, right? Now let's go back to the code. Now let's come to this load question list method. This was the first method that we used in the constructor, and there I told you that this method will simply load my question list. Question list is my instance variable, so it will simply load my question list with a list of questions from my question bank. So it should read that file that I have already created, and it should load all those questions into a list. And I hope you also remember that each element of this list is going to be of question type, right? So let's start coding this. First of all, I'll define an empty question list, right? And then I'll try to open that file. Now the problem with this statement is this, that we are opening it in read mode. So when opening in read mode, what happens if the file does not exist, already exists? It raises exception. So we should handle that exception here. So I'm placing it in a try block. So if that file exists, it's absolutely fine. Its pointer will be returned to F. And if that file does not exist, then what should I do? I should simply return from here, because I have already initialized an empty list. And if this file does not exist, that means there is no question bank already existing. So my question list should be empty, which is already empty, because I initialized to a null list. So I'll simply return from here. So if there is question db.txt, question bank will be loaded in question list. Otherwise, question list is an empty list showing that there are no previous entries. Okay. Now, if we do not return and we successfully execute try block and come to the next line of code which I'm going to write, then what should we do? We'll simply read that file line by line, because we wrote it line by line, so we should read it line by line. I hope you remember that this for loop, it can iterate a file line by line. So it will read the first line. Now when I perform evaluate function on that line, actually we stored it in a string format. Now what Python will do, it will convert it back to list, because we use those square brackets there, and those square brackets will help Python identify that it's a list. So when you use this eval function, that first line will be converted to a 2D list. Now the problem with this 2D list is that it's okay, it's the format in which we are storing those values, but it is not of question type. So what I have to do, I have to convert that list into an object of question type. So I'm defining this dummy object. I'm reading first first item of that list, and I'm setting it as question. Then remaining 3 items, and these 3 items will be used to set the options in my question, and then we are reading the answer. So after execution of this line, Q will be ready. Q is of question type, so we'll just append it to my empty question list, right? So this loop will keep on executing until it reads the whole file, and that's how we are creating this question list. So whenever you initialize an object of question db type, it will run the constructor. The constructor will run this method load question list, and it will simply initialize an empty list, and it will load questions from that file question db.txt if there are any questions, and it will prepare that list for us. And main thing about this question list is that it is a list of questions, and all those questions, they are of question type. Like our first class question, I have also written some test code for this class also, which you can find there in this specific file. and you can run that code to test this class. Now you see, up till now we have implemented two classes, and we have tested that code as well, right? Now let's move on to the third class. Now in this third class we are creating a quiz, and it contains two instance variable, QDB, which will hold the question bank, and another list which will hold the selected questions. So this class will simply select some questions from our question bank QDB, and it will display those questions to the user. It will obtain answers, it will match answers, and it will calculate score, and it will print score. So here's my class, and what I am doing here, I am in calling all the methods, or I am doing everything here in the in the constructor. Like if the user instantiate an object of this quiz type, what happens? It initializes the question bank. Like you see, question DB is the class that we just implemented. So what will happen when this statement executes? It will initialize a list of questions, and I hope you remember that this constructor, question DB's constructor, it calls that load method. So it will simply create a list, in fact question bank, list of questions, and that will be represented by this QDB. So that means we have that question bank loaded into QDB. So after that, let's suppose I call this function make quiz, and I hope you remember that this question will simply select some questions randomly from this QDB, and it will make a quiz. Then we'll display that quiz, take the quiz, calculate scores, and then we'll print the scores. So that means if a person initializes, if person wants to take quiz, like if you want to call this method, or call this functionality of your application, you just need to initialize an object of quiz type. So let's see how these methods are implemented. These three methods: make quiz, take quiz, and print score. Now let's code this method make quiz. This will initialize selected questions list to an empty list, and I'm also initializing another variable count, because what we had decided that it will display 5 questions. So this make quiz method, it will select 5 questions from QDB. So it will select those questions randomly, and it will place those questions in this selected questions list. So I'm running a loop here. You'll soon know while I'm running an infinite loop. Okay, now here I'm using this package random, and I'm using this method random.choice specifically. And what does this method do, random.choice? You pass a list to this method, and it randomly selects an item from that list. So since this QDB is of QDB is a class, and QDB has an element question list, and question list is of list type, and I need to select a question randomly from that list. So I am passing that list to this method choice, and it will return to me that specific entry, which will be of question type, of course, and I'm taking it in n. And now this is a check, because when this random.choice function will execute, it can fetch same question twice, because we are running it this loop 5 times. So it can fetch same question twice. So I'm just checking that that question does not already exist in my selected question list. So this is a simple check. If n not in self dot selected question list, append n to that list. Okay. Otherwise, we'll simply increment the count, and we'll loop back. So if count reaches 5, we'll simply break from this infinite loop. So I hope there is no problem in understanding this logic. Now let's come to the next method, which is take quiz method. We have already created selected question list. Now selected question list contains 5 randomly selected questions from my question bank. I just need to display this list and ask user questions. Now this selected question list also contains elements of question type. So each entry will be complete. It will contain the question, it will contain the options as well as the answer. So here this is just for keeping track of my question. Actually, I'll be printing question number on screen using this. Okay, this is scoring. You can make it local also. No, I don't want to make it local because I need to implement another method that is print score. So I'm making it an instance variable. Okay, this is the loop for question in self-selected question list. I'm printing the question number and then I'm printing the question. Now I hope you remember that we implemented this very handy method in class question. So I'm simply calling this question print question method and it will print the question along with the options. Okay, now I am prompting the user to enter answer A, B or C, because I hope you remember that we listed options as A, B, C. So whatever user enters, I'll simply pass to the check answer method. Now this was another useful method that we implemented in that class question. So I'm just calling it, and if it returns true, score is implemented. Otherwise, we'll just increment the count and we'll loop back. Now this loop will execute 5 times and 5 questions will be, um, will be displayed and their answers will be collected and score will be updated accordingly. Now the last method that is remaining is the print score method. Now I'm not showing you implementation for this method because it's really simple. Print score will simply print that this dot score instance variable with some appropriate message. So I think I don't need to explain it here, but if you go see the file, I have added some statistical information also, like there I have added rating of that player also. Like I am calculating some average score based on the number of players and their performances, and then I'm comparing the current score with that average score. Now in order to maintain that average, what I need to do, I need to define some class variables. So I have defined 2 class variables also there, number of players and average, and I'm updating those each time a new score comes of any player. So that's not some difficult code. You can easily understand it from that file. Otherwise, you don't need to like display those average scores. You can simply print the current score, and that will also do. So that's it. Again, you will find some test code in that file for this particular class, quiz class. And now only one class is remaining, user interface class. So I'll cover that class in the next lecture. So this is what we did today. We implemented these 3 classes: question, question DB and quiz. And what was our approach? We developed these classes independently, we tested them independently, and in the next lecture we'll integrate them all to make a complete application. Thank you.